So here's a little bit about me with my lovely mugshot. I asked them to see if they could make me look like Heidi Klum, and it doesn't look like that worked out too well. But you'll see here just a couple of quick bullets to kind of give you a little bit of my background. I have over 15 years of marketing experience, and of that experience, I have both marketing experience on the agency side, and I think also what's more important is I also have experience on the client side. So it's really helped me to understand when someone like Dina or any of my other clients come to me with a request, I'm able to really easily relate and understand what's going on in their world. I've been an associate since 2014 at Glenn Devens, and I'm helping senior living communities really essentially achieve their occupancy goals. And that really involves developing marketing communications plans. They're metrics-based many times, so we're working with clients to identify what their goals and objectives are, what their budget is, and really put forth a marketing plan that consists of a variety of traditional and digital tactics to help meet those goals. And really, essentially what I do on a day-to-day basis as well is manage all of the client service teams. I have a number of different clients, and I'm working with my teams to make sure that all of the tactics that we're executing for our clients are executing not only within strategy, but making sure that they're executing within budget, because as Dina and many of our clients know, budget is key, and if you stay within that, you will be forever in your client's good grace. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Some of the topics. Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you just make your screen, your slides full size so we can see them better?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Hopefully you can see. Can you see that okay?
It hasn't switched yet. I can see that there you go. It's going to switch now, I think.
Okay, better. And you can just see the main slide.
No, it's showing the
whole thing?
Yeah. Which isn't terrible, but
kind of weird. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's try this one more time. It's really odd. I'm so sorry.
Well, even if do you want to just maybe you can make it bigger in that view. It's back in that black view again, which isn't terrible.
That is so odd. I don't know why it's doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that you're.
Oh, well. Well, I guess we can certainly go this route if that works. I obviously have a couple of, with my next slide, I have some notes, but that's really no big deal if you don't mind.
It doesn't matter, whichever way is more comfortable. You could do it back in that other view too and make it bigger, but this is easy to see, so it's fine. Either way.
How's about that?
There you go. That's fine.
Better?
Sure.
All right.
There you go.
All right. There we go. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go back to my initial slide. And so for topics of discussion today, I want to make sure that I'm touching on a couple of key things and making sure that you have some key takeaways from this presentation. One of them being understanding what the key elements are of direct mail success. Also, ideas and information, giving you ideas, information to maximize each element of success, and then providing you some practical examples from our experience. Glenn Devens does a tremendous amount of direct mail. It's a huge part of our business. And as you'll see going forward, a lot of that has to do with the fact that seniors are still responding to direct mail. And so that continues to be the backbone of many of our clients' direct mail or their marketing communications plans. So why do we believe in direct mail? Well, it allows us, to do a number of different things. It continues to be the most efficient method to provide information to our prospective residents and encourage their response. It allows us really to deliver frequent, consistent, and top quality impressions directly to the mailboxes of age and income qualified prospects, really in a core geographical area. And, you know, there's also a lot of flexibility in format. Direct mail, as you know, I'm sure you've seen a variety of different formats arrive in your mailbox. And it allows us the opportunity to communicate really a variety of different messages, from complex to simple. And so what I wanted to also do is talk about some elements of success. When you're getting ready to develop a direct mail campaign, there's a lot of different components that go into it, but the three biggest components that go into that is your list, you know, identifying who is receiving the mailing, determining what your offer is, what's in it for them. You want to make sure that the person who receives that direct mail piece knows what you're trying to communicate and what's in it for them. And then the format. So what are you mailing? Is it a letter? Is it a newsletter? Is it a self-mailer? What is that format? And you'll notice here on this next slide here, what I wanted to make sure I call out to is that it's not necessarily an even percentage that you need to focus on for each one. We've given a higher weight of importance to the list and the offer than we have essentially the format, because, you know, the format doesn't necessarily matter if you have not targeted the right person with the right message and really given them a compelling reason to engage with you. So you can spend tons of money on a creative piece, but it's essentially going to be thrown in the trash if the message doesn't necessarily resonate with your audience. So one of the key things I've mentioned here is number one is the list. So what I'd like to do here in the next section is talk about how to buy and maintain the best list. So one thing that we do when we get ready to buy a list for our clients is make sure that we are looking at propensity. What are the keys to propensity? Mailing to those with the greatest propensity to buy is our main objective. And that includes a number of different items. That includes everything from where they live to the level of care, whether your community is operational or it's in development, what the average age of your residents are, the immediate availability or wait list, types of residences that you offer or have available, what the past behaviors or purchases are of your current residents and your target audience, making sure that, you know, you're demonstrating the right lifestyle in your piece, and then the life stage. And when I say life stage, I really essentially mean senior living is not transaction-based. So essentially what you're doing is relying on criteria to build the profile of a person with the highest propensity to buy. So we'll do this a lot of times by analyzing just general category trends, and then also looking at your community's history or situation. And going back to operational versus development, you know, this is very important because senior living buyers that are looking at operational communities are generally, we're seeing an average of about 82 years of age. So when we're looking at criteria, we're targeting typically a buyer who's about 75 years of age or higher. That's the most popular criteria we choose. When we're looking at buyers in new developments, you know, those developments require typically a younger buyer. They're going to wait a minimum of around 2 to 3 years, oftentimes 4 to 5, before they move in. And we have found that the gestation period from the time somebody looks at a senior living community to the time that they literally place the deposit is averaging around 18 months. So we're targeting typically in a development community around an age of about 70 years of age or higher. We go a little bit lower on the age criteria.
This is Carolyn. Yeah. Can you define operational versus development? I mean, I get the idea of what you mean there, because it sounds like you mean by development the bigger new developments with more independent living. Is there a quick definition you could give for operational versus development?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Operational is a community that has been up and running essentially without, you know, any updates to it, say any expansion underway, any kind of new development. That's basically what we call operational. It's a community that's been built, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and
Oh.
it is considered operational. It is what it is.
Okay, so it's an existing property versus a new development, basically.
Right. So anything
Oh.
that's considered development is a community that's either expanding their current services by building on, for example, building and expanding their health services, and or building a new service there or a new property on the campus.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So when we look at identifying the keys to propensity, there's a number of different criteria that we tend to look at. So this criteria essentially boils down to 3 main areas. We're looking at age, we're looking at financial means, and geography. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to create a buyer profile for your community. First, we start with age. And really, when you do that, you want to evaluate the age of your leads, your depositors, and your residents. You can cap your age, meaning you could do an age range of 70 to 85 and stop it there. But we don't typically tend to do that because what we found is, I know it sounds kind of cliche, but age is only a number, and you really don't lose much in your counts if you keep that age range open. So for example, just do 70 and up. It's also important to note that when you're requesting an age, when you're building your list, that age is the head of the household. And another thing I wanted to touch on briefly is I know that many Benedictine health system communities are very health services focused. So it's important to talk about, really targeting the adult child influencer, or what we call for short the ACI. When we're targeting an ACI, we're typically looking at an age range between 45 to 65 years of age. And when we're sending direct mail to this target audience, we are communicating with them in a completely different way than we would our senior, because they don't behave or respond like seniors do. And so further on here in the presentation, I'll show you a couple of examples of that. And then strategies for reducing your counts. We tend to see that the ACI is female when it comes to gender. We look at 2-income households, and we also look at proximity. And so I'll show you a couple of examples of what that proximity would look like here a little bit further on. Financial means is very important. You want to make sure that you're targeting a customer who can afford your community. So when you're determining if someone can afford your community, you really want to look at 4 key areas. You're going to want to look at their annual household income, their net worth. And net worth means this is all of their assets, including their home value, minus any debt. And then you also want to look at what their income producing assets are and what their home value is. Another key important factor is geography. And so I've kind of left this blank because geography is, as you know, it's based on where you live. So really what we say about geography is understanding what the kind of key barriers are with your geography. Look at the highways, look at your bodies of water nearby, get to know them. Do a map your residents, depositors, and leads to kind of determine what your primary marketing area and what your secondary marketing area will look like. So if you, for example, want to test a new market, look at the pattern of your residents and your PMA and see where they have access to highways, or even evaluate areas where seniors have no other choices. And use that to kind of set a PMA and an SMA. We tend to focus our dollars more on the PMA. And then if you have any zips that we kind of call wild card zips that you want to maybe test, do that as what we call a tertiary market, a TMA. That's typically the way that we approach geography when it comes to the criteria. And I also wanted to kind of bring some clarification to a lot of the different financial criteria that we look at, because it can be a little bit confusing. Household income, when we're reaching out to a list broker and asking for household income, you can purchase that in $5,000 increments, and it's essentially an annual number. This is that person's annual household income. And in order to essentially determine what that is, we typically calculate it by doing 1.5 times the monthly service fee. Some communities will even go a little bit higher than that and calculate it by 1.67 or 2 times. And we also know that couples rarely move into small units, so we tend to look at considering targeting singles and couples at different household income levels. We also have found what's very interesting is that you really don't want to get hung up on a person's household income, because I call this the millionaire next door that you might not even be aware of. There are many people that we have found that just because they have, for example, a household income of $30,000, that doesn't mean that they don't have, say, $1 million in net worth and the ability to afford the community. So we found that considering, dropping the household income or even eliminating that requirement and even setting a high net worth helps us find additional people in some of the top zip codes. We have also wanted to clarify net worth. So, breakpoints are different for each list company. So when you reach out and talk with a broker, they're going to essentially have different breakpoints for how they pull net worth. This does include the home. And when you're looking at net worth, it's typically factored to be, you want to look at it being 2 times the entrance fee. And again, we've also seen that, as I said with the previous slide on annual income, couples rarely move into small units. So we've looked at kind of targeting singles and couples at different net worth levels to help with segmentation. And, I also wanted to talk about income producing assets. Oops, I got off a little bit here. Let me keep on going. There we go. Income producing assets. So income producing assets are actually set up in different breakpoints for each list company as well. In fact, one of our list companies that we use, Info, they don't even have IPA or income producing assets. It's important to note that it doesn't include the home. And when we are looking at doing income producing assets, we do typically a home value lower than 2 times the entrance fee. One thing that we also look at when developing our list, we typically will do income producing assets and or net worth, and that makes sure that you're capturing however that data is being recorded. Some list companies record IPA and some companies do net worth. It's just kind of an either or. So if you do an and or with that in your list purchase request with the broker, you're more likely to capture a lot more people. And when it comes to home value, I know that a lot of people, when determining whether or not they can move to a community, they're very focused on needing to actually sell their home as a means of income to be able to make that move. And again, breakpoints are different for each list company. So we have clients that we want their home value to be right near the exact size of the entrance fee. That's not always necessarily the case, and I'll show you an example of how to factor that a little bit later on. But again, we also find couples rarely move into small units, so you'll want to, when you're looking at home value levels, targeting singles and couples a little bit differently. Again, you can set this as an and or, and making home value, we found as a requirement, can also reduce your list, because a lot more people, you'll notice it reduces your counts. It's an additional level of criteria. When you're purchasing your list, you are going to definitely want to purchase, if you're doing a multi-use list, you want to purchase key codes. And, don't purchase them. My personal opinion is don't purchase them unless you plan on using them. Key codes will essentially, when you purchase that list, allow you to segment that list however you would like. So make sure that you're going to have, that you're going to use it if you're going to pay for the key codes. And the most popular reason that people purchase key codes is to, basically segment their inventory. So for example, if you have in your community, you're seeing a large available occupancy for single units or smaller units, you can go into your list and then segment that by their marital status, you know, for example, a widow or a single person, and look at things like home value, household income, and see how those align with the inventory that you actually have available, and be able to target those people a little bit better than you would if you were not to purchase those key codes. And I think it's also important to note that purchasing ACI key codes is a little bit different than senior key codes. ACIs, we typically look at household income, gender, marital status, and age. And some list companies have what they call a family ties database, meaning you can request counts of ACIs who have actually indicated that they have a senior parent living with them in their home, or even within a few miles of their home. And so, you know, again, that information is recorded differently by list companies. So we recommend discussing it with your list broker, and they'll tell you essentially how their data is organized to help you choose the criteria that's best. One additional audience that I know that you speak with and would like to potentially target are professional influencers. Now, these come in very handy when you are a community that has a health service focus. You know, a lot of these professional influencers, the most common ones that we reach out to and communicate with for our clients are financial planners, family attorneys, estate planning attorneys, and physicians and surgeons. And not only that, but, you know, list companies realize, and they have all of this information for you. They, you know, they have a number of different sources that they rely on to pull information on professional influencers. These list companies, they basically scour yellow pages. They look at annual reports. They get federal, state, and municipal government data. They look at business magazines, newsletters, newspapers. They gather all of this information on professional influencers and input it into their database. And they compile the records by a number of different reasons. You know, they'll look at phone books. They hand key in each record. They call businesses to make sure they have the most reliable information. They look at data recorded at county courthouse filings or with the SEC. And one thing that's kind of compelling to note is that 48,000 new businesses are added every week from sources such as new business registrations. So, you know, when list purchase companies are gathering all of this data, they're out there and they're gathering it on a up-to-date weekly basis. So if you were to purchase a professional influencer list, you'll know that you're, you know, if, for example, somebody launched a new business, you would be probably one of the first to reach them. So now that we've talked about, you know, professional influencers, I wanted to go into talking about just essentially a community example. I've kind of used a term called the village, and this is kind of a fake community, but it's essentially what I'd like to do is just put together how you would essentially build a list for a community like the village. So the village is an operational life care. They're a CCRC. They're populated in a metropolitan suburb. They have a lot of competition around them. They're not cheap, but they're not too expensive. Their entrance fees range from about $225 up to $650,000. Your monthly service fee, you have a range anywhere from $2,400 to $5,000. Village has a focus on independent living. They have a number of different floor plans available, and their average move-in age that they've seen so far is 78 years old. Now, when you're trying to determine the ideal net worth for a community like the village, if the entrance fee ranges from $225 to $650, you want to make sure that you're identifying a net worth requirement that matches the lowest entrance fee, because you want to make sure that you're targeting an audience who could afford essentially the lowest entrance fee and or the lowest cost for the lowest unit. So we typically do a net worth requirement of 2 times the lowest entrance fee, which means the net worth criteria for your list purchase for the village would be $500,000 or greater. Now, when determining the annual income, it's a little bit different. The monthly service fees are $2,400 to $5,000. So again, you're going to want to target the lowest monthly service fee. You're going to times that by 12 months, and then you kind of determine the monthly service fee is approximately 60% of that person's income. So, you know, knowing that the list purchase companies do, they break out their increments a little bit differently when it comes to annual income. We would do an annual income criteria for this list purchase at about $50,000 or more. So putting it all together, what does that look like? So you're putting this all together for the village. So your list request or your list purchase criteria would be someone with the age 75 or greater, a net worth of $500,000 and or a home value of $250,000 or greater, a household income of $50,000 or greater, and that person being the head of the household. And then you would look at your geography, again, as I've mentioned, look at where you have your greatest number of depositors, leads, where your residents came from, and make sure that you're identifying what zip codes have generated the most activity for you, and you'll want to choose those zip codes to purchase your counts from. One thing that you'll find kind of interesting is some communities have different criteria for different portions of their community. So for example, at the village, they have an expansion going on, and it's an independent living expansion, and it's going to target a younger senior audience. So the age range for this portion of their campus would be 70 or up, because you don't want to go too high. You still want to target that younger senior. The same campus, but a different portion, you have the village studios. And so this is an independent living. Say you have smaller units, they're likely to draw a single person or an older widow. So we would make sure that we have our age and marital status to match that criteria. So we would target a little bit older target audience and make sure that we are targeting a single as far as a marital status. And then for the village cottages, for example, they're an independent living on the campus, but they're a more expensive option. So we would target somebody in and around 75 or greater. And because it's a more expensive option, we would look at targeting them with a higher net worth and a little bit higher home value and a higher household income. So this just kind of gives you an example of, you could have one community, but not one criteria is going to essentially fit. It's not a one size fits all. You're going to want to make sure that if you have different products or different things going on in your community and on your campus, that you're tailoring your criteria to meet that. This is a great example of one of my communities that I recently worked with. They were located in Wichita, and they had a health services expansion going on within their community, and they also were building a brand new independent living building. And so we wanted to make sure that in phase 1, which was their health services expansion, that we were targeting a completely different audience than we would with a new independent living product. So this is the exact criteria that we used to target people for this community. We looked at the adult child as a caregiver. We had a specific set of criteria, and then we also had a criteria for professional influencers that we reached out to. And we made sure that throughout that phase 1 health services expansion, that we were targeting these people specifically. And when that health services expansion was done and built and fully occupied, the new independent living was being erected. And so we made sure that we were targeting a completely different set of criteria for that audience. So when we talk about audience, now we also want to talk about budget, because when you're putting together a list, it can be a little overwhelming, and especially if you have a budget. Managing quantity and budget are pretty tough. So I wanted to put together a couple of quick tips to help you with developing that list and making sure that you're doing it in the manner that fits your budget. one thing that you want to do is determine what your return on investment is going to be. So for example, if you have an event coming up and you're purchasing a list for this event and you're looking at targeting 20,000 people, well, you want to make sure that you're assuming what your response rate is going to be. An average response rate would be, say, a 0.25%, which means you would get approximately 50 inquiries. Now, those 50 inquiries are buying units. So you're going to also want to assume that half the callers are going to bring a guest. So make sure that you kind of factor that in when you're doing an event. We want to also make sure that, we've had some communities that, they invest all of their time and all of their funds and budget into an amazing event. And then when they're looking at direct mail and the criteria and the counts, they've come up and said, oh, you know what, we're falling kind of short on our budget. We might need to cut back a little bit. Well, if you're putting the money and the time and the investment into an event, say an open house for a new portion of your community that you just opened, we have found that, the incremental cost per lead for a large mailing is very, very minimal. So it's best to make sure that you put your dollars and your budget is focused on targeting as many people as you possibly can, and making sure that, if you're going to put all that time and resource into developing an event, make it worth it. Make sure that you're getting people in the door. So when you're trying to determine what you can afford, I put together these just couple of little tips to help you kind of go through that process. One thing that I found is very helpful is to prioritize. You want to be thorough. You want to make sure that you have coverage in your best zips. So if you have zip codes that are performing great for you, do not leave them out. Make sure that you prioritize those zip codes, and then tighten your criteria elsewhere. If you have a limited amount of budget, focus those dollars where you're going to get the greatest return. Be strategic when you're segmenting. When you're purchasing a list, if you do want to segment, purchase key codes and use that inventory for your segmentation. And last but not least, be smart with your dollars. Buy only what you can use. So, for example, if you have results that give you 20,000 records, you don't necessarily have to buy them all. Sometimes it's better to just buy less and mail to those people more consistently. It's a strategy if you have a limited budget. And, one of the questions I've received recently is, how do I find a reputable list broker? Glenn Devins, we're a large agency, and we have a direct mail team that is specialized in working with list brokers. But I understand that not everybody is like that. So I worked with my direct mail team to say, okay, put yourself in someone else's shoes who might not have done this before. How do they find a reputable list broker? A couple of the points they made to me is professional referrals are always great. Get recommendations from your peers. If you have contacts at other communities, reach out to them and say, hey, have you had any luck purchasing lists? And if so, who have you purchased from? Oh, and who should I not reach out to and purchase? Sometimes it's almost best to know what the nightmare stories are to stay away from them. Get referrals from your printers. If you reach out and have local printers, they very likely have relationships with local list managers and brokers, and they are more than happy to give you that recommendation. And, sometimes online searches are good. I wanted to make sure that I included that because, it's not uncommon for people to go out and search the internet. It's not my number one choice. I put that kind of at the bottom of the list here. I would say professional referrals are probably my number one recommendation. When you do reach out to the broker, we found that if you can request counts from at least 4 list companies, that increases the number of seniors that you're going to get, the number of people that you're going to get in your top performing zip codes. It just gives you much more, it's basically like casting a wide net. So 4 is kind of that magic number. And the 4 companies that we use some pretty large ones: Epsilon, Axiom, Equifax, and Info. Those are the number 1 companies that we use and we've had a lot of success with. But again, there are many local list brokers out there who can assist you. I've also been asked, should I purchase the list or should I rent a list? So you can purchase it or you can rent it, but I wanted to also share with you pros and cons to doing that. If you're going to purchase a list, it's great because you can do essentially whatever you want to do with it other than sell it. You can also use it as many times as you want and keep it up to date with all of the information that you have. The only cons that I could really find to purchasing a list are, of course, the cost. It's always more expensive to purchase a list. And then some list companies do require a period of usage. So you'll have to sign a contract that you can use that list a number of times up to a set date. If you wanted to do a single use or a rental of that list, you're going to find that it's much less expensive. So that is definitely a pro. The only con is that you don't have any rights to that data that you've purchased, and many times it's literally just you're renting that list for one-time access, and it's a very specific time period. And then in many instances, we've noticed that suppliers don't even send that list directly to you. If you're wanting to rent a list for a mailing, they'll require working, say, with your mail house or with their preferred mail house directly to facilitate your mailing. So, working with a local list broker can be a little intimidating if you haven't done so before. So a couple of tips that I have for you are just making sure that you work with someone who manages and brokers lists. They tend to be the most knowledgeable, and I've noticed that they tend to want to talk with you live. So email communication, a lot can get lost in translation. I think email communication comes in extremely handy when you are working with contracts and setting the criteria and really hammering out all of those details that you'd like a paper trail to. But when you're talking with your broker, it's best to talk with them live because they want to understand your criteria and the goal of your campaign. They want to understand what it is you want to achieve, what kind of target audience you're going to be talking to. And a lot of times they'll even ask you to send them the direct mail piece that you're planning on sending out so they can make sure that they have a total understanding of what your goal is. And, you also want to ensure that you have, documentation of their proper insurance. And most list brokers or managers will not be at all offended if you request to see it. It's a common request. Another key item to keep in mind and ask your list broker is, how do they keep their data clean? What is the quality of it? For example, most list brokers and managers compile their data and they keep it clean through a national change of address registry. So that's basically a process by which they reach out to all of the postal service, and they make sure that with the national change of address that goes through the postal service, they are updating their data on a regular basis to make sure that those addresses and contact information align with the national change of address with the postal service. Another item that they do is, you want to ask how they source their list. Some list brokers and some managers prefer, they have their own data, and some of them will try to keep you within it. A really good list broker or a list manager will not be so hung up on selling you their data. They will be focused on trying to get you the best data possible, even if it's not theirs. And I think it's also important to note that some of these larger list brokers and managers, they do like working with the big dogs, but they also place tremendous value on smaller communities and just small businesses as a whole. They understand that when you reach out to them, they have an opportunity to give you a great experience and that you're going to come back. And it's that return business that keeps them in business. So I kind of already went through a lot of this, but I would essentially these are general questions that you can refer back to. One of the other key items that I found from my experience is that, communities sometimes get return mail and they freak out a little bit. They'll say, oh my gosh, why am I getting so much return mail? Make sure that you set that expectation first with your list broker. A lot of that can essentially depend on how you're mailing. If you're mailing third class or nonprofit, you're not going to get any return mail because that's not part of that service. However, if you are mailing first class postage, you will get return mail. That's part of the service that they offer. And I think really essentially don't freak out when you get a lot of return mail. I would just ask your list broker to give you an idea of how much you should expect. And I think I'll cover this a little bit later, but one of the best practices, if you do mail first class and you get return mail, make sure that you're updating your list and make sure that you are not spending unnecessary dollars remailing to those people. So when we keep a list for our clients, we here follow a very common set of best practices that I'd like to make sure I just touch upon briefly. We keep a database of all people who reach out and request that we do not mail to them, and I highly recommend that for your community. Make sure that they are what we basically call it a house purge file. And anything that we mail to down the road, any targets, we always bump that list, our mailing list, against our house purge file. So make sure that you are doing that. Make sure that, again, your return mail can be added to the do not mail file, and ensure that your list is put through the National Change of Address Registry. It should be essentially run through your registry every 90 days to make sure that it's as clean as possible. And what we typically do as well is we purchase a list every 12 months, and that ensures that we are the most up-to-date contacts and for our clients. We've had some instances where out and said, why am I receiving mail? My husband or my wife passed away 2-3 years ago. And so, of course, that phone call goes to our community, and then the community calls us and says, why are we mailing to dead people? It's a common occurrence, and there are a number of different reasons why. So I wanted to make sure that I share that with you. People who, we basically have 3 sources for receiving deceased information. There are weekly Social Security updates. Sometimes a loved one will actually call a list company directly, and then the Monthly Direct Marketing Association also does updates. A lot of reasons why people who are deceased are left on the list is because the current death benefit is so minimal that many people don't even call or apply for it. So that's the main reason. A lot of times the data for Social Security is name and zip only, so it's the address. So many widows also leave their deceased husband's name active in the phone book. So you'll notice with this generation, a lot of women still keep their husband's name, and all of the mail and everything comes there. Removing deceased relatives' names from the mailing list, essentially it just isn't a top priority for many families. A lot of times, many families, as you're aware, they have a time of loss that they're going through, and they just don't get around to reporting it immediately. So, for example, if a person passed away this past spring, and we purchased a list for our client in August, that person's name still might be on the list. So we've kind of gone through a lot of different stuff on lists. And what I wanted to do next is just touch upon the call to action. Because as I mentioned earlier on in this presentation, if you are not, there's a couple different key areas and approaches. You can target the right person, but you also have to have a compelling message and an offer. So I wanted to give just a few general thoughts on offers to make sure that, as you go forward, you can work these kind of tips and tricks into your future direct mail campaigns. Essentially, the purpose of direct mail is to give seniors, a senior living counselor, the opportunity to conversation, not only with the senior, but with the ACI or the professional influencer. And as I mentioned earlier on, senior living is not transactional. So your main objective with your direct mail and with your offer should be to start or continue a relationship. You're basically fostering a little bit of a personal interaction, and with your direct mail, you should be establishing a conversation and working that person through, say, the sales pipeline. So when you're reaching out to a fresh prospect to try to get them to turn into a lead, you're introducing them to the community. And if they come back and raise their hand and say they want to learn more, all of your future communication should be fostering that relationship and carrying them through the sales pipeline. Your main goal should essentially be getting prospects to your community. You want to make sure that your direct mail and your offer works best when it's tied to an event, because we found that events are what really generate the most response. I wanted to share a couple of just really quick examples of some direct mail campaigns that we have recently executed. We focus on a couple of different direct mail campaigns for our clients, and I think there's a lot that can be gleaned from just some of these brief examples. When we're targeting a prospect, or when you're targeting a prospect, you're really wanting to generate them into a lead. And we conduct a couple of different categories, I would say, for direct mail. This one was what I would call a social. This falls into a social category where you're bringing people into the community. It's not a seminar. You're not trying to sell them on anything. It's what we call a social event. And so with social events, you want to have a little bit more of a fun, a voice. You also want to make sure that not only are you keeping your branding, but you are giving that person an exciting reason to want to learn more. So for example, you'll see the call to action on this envelope is, seriously, this might be the most perfect event ever. And so that's the first impression that that person is getting from what they receive in their mailbox, and it's going to lead them to want to open that piece. Here's another social event that we recently executed. We found that, when you're reaching out to people in your market, that you want to make sure that you understand what's resonating with your audience. Do they like jazz? Do they like food? What kind of events do you think will draw your audience? And a lot of times that just involves doing a quick gut check with some of your current residents. Say, hey, if you were to invite a friend to the community, what do you think would draw them to an event here? What kind of a theme or what kind of a focus would really get them in the door? And in this case, we did a social event for a community that was focused on jazz. We've also found that resident panels are a huge lead generation tactic, and a re-inquiry tactic, really, for that matter. This is one that we did for Harrogate. They're a senior living community in New Jersey, and they have a number of different what we call brand or community ambassadors. Many communities will select a number of ambassadors to greet guests, sit with them during events, and talk about their experience and how the community has really helped them experience a better retirement. And so this is an event that invites people to the community to meet with residents and learn more. There's also educational events, and you'll find that when you're reaching out and targeting, say, an ACI or a professional influencer, educational events tend to go a little bit farther with them and get more of a response. We've also found that, when independent living is part of your community, people who are evaluating and they're at the initial phase of looking at retirement communities, and they're in that information gathering phase of the sales process, they tend to find educational events extremely helpful. This is one that we did for Terrence O'Malley, and it was a very unbiased presentation on how to understand what the benefits of the CCRC are, and really helping people walk through how to determine what is the best community for them. And here's another one that I thought would be really, you'd find pretty interesting. We bring a lot of different subject matter experts to our communities, and Dick Edwards is a gentleman who's very well known. He's written a lot of books. One of the most well-known books he's written is Mom, Dad, Can We Talk? And it's about fostering a conversation between the ACI and the parent on when is the right time to potentially move to a senior living community. And so we recommend reaching out and talking with some of the local speakers in your market to see if they have any interest in coming to the community for an educational event. Again, ACIs respond very well to these types of events, and a lot of times ACIs and parents will come together. And then really last but not least, a newsletter. These can be a little bit more expensive, but here's an example of a newsletter that I did for one of my communities. And it was a community that was independent living, under construction and being built. And they were in the phase of gathering depositors for the new independent living building. And what we also did, with the newsletter, obviously it allows you to feature a lot more content, but one thing that we found is that you have to be very strategic with your content. So for example, you'll notice here, they had a floor plan. While they were doing really great with their deposits and their sales, they had a floor plan that was not selling for some reason. So what they did, we worked with them to identify this floor plan in the newsletter, call out all of the key benefits, and then tie an incentive to it. For example, when they place their deposit, they'll receive a decorating and design incentive. And we found that this strategy had a huge response. We had people actually calling into the community after receiving this newsletter and requesting to see this floor plan, and it actually generated a number of deposits. And just really general thoughts on message and offers. Your leads that you've currently mailed to and have already reached out to your community to request information, you're going to have a different interaction with them. A lot of times they respond better to discounts, limited time offers, try it programs. And you also want to have, now that you've already established a conversation with them, fostering a more intimate conversation, bringing them in for more one-on-one lunches, lifestyle events, and really they've already expressed interest. So start touching them with discounts, some limited time offers, things to really kind of get them over the hump. For potential future leads, when you're mailing to, say, a prospect list, bringing them in and inviting them to informational seminars, lunch and learns, as I mentioned, resident panels, open house or special interest events. Those are a really great way to get people into the community for the first time. It's a large audience. It's not one-on-one. It's not the hard sell. And they feel a lot more at ease coming to the community because of that. And then here's just a couple of quick examples on how to drive a sense of urgency. Everything from special pricing, price increase by January if you act now. A lot of our communities have actually created what we call a countdown club. So for example, if you have a new health services that's being built, or even you have an opportunity to fill some occupancy in your community, creating what we call a countdown club to savings. So a certain dollar amount off of your monthly service fee if you complete your deposit or secure a reservation by X date. Those types of offers tend to resonate really well with your lead base. And last but not least, I want to make sure that I touch upon format and message. You definitely want to make sure that you're identifying what the objective of your mailing is, identifying the need for illustrations or photos, making sure that you're working your community brand into that format, and really try to understand what type of message it is that you want to deliver. Is it a personal message or is it a general message? As you know, there are a number of different format examples, everything from as simple as a letter to a postcard, to even some of the fancier die-cut mailers and newsletters. So you just want to make sure that your format and your message ties to your format. So for example, if you have a more intimate event going on in your community, say a holiday event where you want to target a specific number of hot leads, that format might do better with just a more personalized invitation with a note card in an envelope. Whereas if you're doing a prospect mailing where you want to announce some of the amazing things going on at your community, a newsletter or a self-mailer might go a little bit farther. And we also recommend with any format, keep it fresh, don't overdo it. We want to also be sure to be careful to avoid, non-traditional formats. So die cuts, things that are fancy, I always recommend running your direct mail piece by your mail house and your printer first. Make sure that whatever it is that you're designing or that you have in mind, you're touching base with all of the people that are going to be touching that further down the road to make sure it doesn't get stuck at the printer or, the post office when they're running it through. You want to make sure that that format is going to work for everybody, because it's a waste of money if you don't. And I also recommend, investing in the piece. So making sure that, you're looking at your volume and frequency, and don't spend any more on postage than necessary. If you have the ability to mail nonprofit, I would definitely recommend doing so. And really last but not least, as I mentioned, tailor your message. Make sure that, you're talking with your adult child influencer much differently than your professional influencer. When you're talking with an adult child, you want to make sure that your message establishes trust, that you're displaying empathy, that you understand that their time is limited. They probably have a million things going on. Provide them opportunities to meet with them either before or after business hours. We have found that direct mail pieces, for example, that invite the ACI in for a after work discussion about the community work really well. One tactic that we used at a community that worked really well was we had the community, actually their dining services, develop a dinner on the go. So they prepared to-go family meals to where the ACI, and many times the female who's coming in, to the community after a long day at work and she's exhausted and she's thinking, my gosh, how am I going to get dinner on the table when I get home? They will provide all of the information on the community, talk with her, and then say, you know what, dinner's on us. And they give that person dinner to go, and it has gone a very long way. It helps. You can immediately see, our community said, the relief on their face just knowing dinner was taken care of. So find ways to help make their life easier. Position yourself as a resource of knowledge and expertise. And that also goes for the professional influencer, making sure that you are working with them with their schedule, conducting open houses outside of normal business hours for them, providing them testimonials, just ways to make their life easier. So I think I'm just at about the hour-long mark. So hopefully, I know I covered a lot of information in an hour, but I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Teresa, do you have any recommendations on using a nonprofit indicia, or do you know much about that end of things?
I don't personally, but our direct mail team, they are amazing. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I can certainly reach out to them and get you all the information that you need.
Okay, that'd be great. I know this is Carolyn, and we've had some issues with one of our indicias. So, and there's also other communities that aren't using one that I think could benefit. So, I'll talk more about that with you later.
Sure. Yeah, and there is actually a process for reaching out to the post office and requesting a nonprofit mailing status. And I'd be happy to share that with everybody.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions? Well, this is Dina again. I just want to let everybody know that we did get a lot of really good information here, and I thank you for that, Teresa. But Julie and Carolyn and I are here for all of you if you are interested in. I know we've all done a little bit of direct mail, but if you're interested in taking on some bigger projects and implementing some of the great information that we learned here today, so you're not in it alone. And I just also wanted to mention too that Anne Thorson, who is our designer, worked at a print shop for 18 years. And so, Teresa, when you said, make sure that you run it by your printer or the post office to make sure that it's going to work for mailing, Anne is really good at that. She's done every kind of mailer imaginable and has contacts too. So we can help you make sure as you're designing these pieces that they will actually work for the mailing. So that's just something good to keep in mind. Okay, with that, Teresa, again, thank you so much for this great information. We appreciate it. And everybody else, thank you for attending and have a great day.
Thank you
very much.
Bye. Thank you.